Hello, and welcome to episode 67 of Prose. This week, see what happens when magic and negative emotions mix and delve into the power of memory, reminiscing, and our ability to reach back but not into the past. I will forego my usual pleas for everyone to leave ratings, reviews, and to subscribe, and I will simply beg you all this. Share this show with one person. One person that likes podcasts, that enjoys fiction, that likes DIY projects, that is bored on their commute. One person that is a literature fiend. Just someone. That can go a very long way, and I can't tell you how much that would mean to me. Thanks for listening. Let's get to the tale, shall we? This week, we have Lodestar and Back to Before by first-time guest author James Harrington. Enjoy. Lodestar, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. Janesh had always known harm and hurt and pain. From a very early age, his town elders had called him a magnet for misfortune. He had an uncanny talent for taking pains from others. It wasn't spells or incantations or powders or syrups. No. Just a bit of time with Janesh meant that the offended party, be they troubled by physical or emotional pain, either one, would walk away freed of their problems. The people of the town very quickly came to call him the Lodestone, due to this talent for drawing out and drawing away people's problems from them. They could care less where those ills went. Certainly, no one ever thought to ask Janesh where all the bad went. The most obvious answer, of course, was the truth of the matter. All that badness went into him. Though this was the case, Janesh was fearless in taking on that daunting task. His family called him a Lodestar because they thought of him as something of a leader, an example. Yes, hurt was drawn toward him and exercised by him, but he also never let his smile crack. His good humor and good nature were always unwavering. He shared joy with people, in addition to shouldering their burdens for them. That unassailable courage was beyond laudable to his family and those close to him. He seemed never to shy away from even the most dire of cases. He seemed to be untouched by the fear and pain and causticness of the world and his position in it, largely due to his own lack of knowledge of true fear and pain and causticness. He need not fear those he loved suffer, because he could take it from them. Therefore, he did not know those tortures as a normal man might. Lodestone attracting the tears of the world. Lodestar walking upright and serving as what every man and every woman wished they could be, were they stronger. This is why his family was ecstatic when he met Shailene. The two met while Janesh was attending an older woman one home over from Shailene's. She had heard of him, as she was a nursing attendant for the town's physicer and a runner for the town chemist, but the two had never had the occasion to meet. After that first meeting, they moved quickly. That very afternoon they chose to lunch together and go for a walk in the Magister's gardens. Within a week, they did so every day, twice a day. Within a month, they both began to neglect every other aspect of their lives, only wanting to see one another. Each was manna for the other's presence. They were all the other needed to survive. Janesh's family was maybe even more touched and hopeful than Janesh himself. They had prayed for years that Janesh be rewarded someday for taking on all the negativity he had over the years, and would, no doubt, continue to do so for the remainder of his days. Shailene seemed to be his very own counterbalance to all the bad that was his daily life. She magnified his joys and lessened his pains. She made him laugh and love even greater than he did unaided. She was his own philosopher's stone, turning all the dark and worthless into gold. The courting process, as it was across all the reaches, were quite expansive, though. So, despite Shailene and Janesh's desire to marry a mere year into their relationship, social graces and tradition and general peer pressure meant that they would have to wait. Because of that, they did. For 5 long years, the two continued their lives together, but apart. They began working together, in hopes that proximity might offset their disappointment at being in lovers' limbo. And as time marched ever forward, as the two continued to love one another but began to change, so did their love. With every passing day, Janesh loved Shailene more and more. He ached with how much he cared for her and was all but sick when he was forced to be away from her during his rounds, while she was off doing her continued duties for the physiker and the chemist when she could not join him. Shailene, however, became more and more distant. She did not join him as much these days. She wanted to spend more time at her other duties rather than the combined work of her knowledge and Janesh's talent. Less and less did she meet his eyes for long, loving stares. More and more did those eyes search and scan for other sets of eyes from which to get those attentions. All of this putrefaction came to a head when Janesh finally could not take the archaic courting process anymore and proposed to Shailene. He was utterly blind to her shifting loyalties and loves. So, he'd made his way to her small cottage just down the road from the physiker's quarters, trudging through the snows of deep December. A dangerous and slightly ridiculous thing to do with night coming on, and in one of the harshest winters in recent memory. He just had to do this. After he was done kneeling on one knee and offering up his mother's rather humble heirloom wedding ring, Shailene couldn't help but snort-bark a laugh, chortling as she tried to give him her no to his heartfelt proposal. His proposal was so sincere but so ill-timed that she couldn't help but find some humor in the situation. It was utterly ridiculous to her. She pulled him up by his outer coat that he'd not removed in his excitement to get inside and get to proposing. She did not wait a heartbeat before she gave him a very curt no and let him know unequivocally that she'd be going on spring rounds with the traveling Physical Corps, to which she'd been accepted. She went on to tell him of her various activities with other men in their community and how she just didn't feel that his attentions and affections were enough for her. She wanted more. More of what, she was unclear on, and unclear about, both for herself and for Janesh. When she had finished, they both stood feet apart, two strangers looking at one another, waiting for something. Shailene asked him if he had anything to say. She wondered to herself if, while he was clearly hurting deeply himself, what happened to his pain when he felt it? Was it different in the wake of all the foreign pains he'd taken in over all these years? She realized these ponderings were nothing more than curiosity. She didn't really care about the answer. She didn't really care about Janesh. She would go out and have her fun, defying and killing the life she had thought she'd live with Janesh, becoming something and someone new. Janesh stood transfixed in the moment, paralyzed by the implications of a life wanted, a life wasted. By the Reach's standards, he was beyond marrying age for anyone worth having, and, far more importantly to him, this was the life he wanted. He vaguely heard Shailene ask him if he had anything to say to her. In all these years, he had never spoken out of anger to her. He had never disliked any part of her. Yet, he had not been the most vocal with his love either. Was this all his fault? Very quickly, Janesh's anger flared and then went flat. Then his stomach roiled. He'd never known this type of harm. He'd always been immune. His courage, he was finding, was simply born of a lack of first-hand, self-acquired knowledge and experience in the awful things of the world. Absolute calm took him over, and he felt as if he went somewhere else. He could think clearly, and that clarity showed him what he sincerely wanted for this betrayer, this ruiner of lives. He took a deep, broken breath and spoke out in a flat tone. I have no magic, no matter what the people say. That much is for sure, as these last few years would have gone much differently. But I can hope and wish and pray and chant and beg the powers of this reality to bring you pain. And that is it then. I wish that you only know pain and suffering. I wish successes in all the wrong things and dismal failures in all the right. I wish you hurt. I wish you stillbirths and miscarriages, never to experience the pure joy of unfettered love. I wish you cancers that do not kill but mar and force languishing in your own filth, wishing for the more abbreviated sentence of the plague. I wish you violence from any and all that might offer it. I wish that you may see your family and those that you love share in your misfortunes, that they rot in front of your eyes and die well before you, leaving you alone and broken. I wish you ruined flesh and screaming joints and flaking teeth. I wish you bulging boils and pus-filled pustules on and inside you. I wish you decomposition and decay and hurt and everything shy of death. I wish that death should stay her hand. In fact, I wish for you as long a life as one could ever imagine, and beyond, an eternity in which to waste away and think of the monstrous things you've done and that you are. Again, make no mistake, I am no magus, but I can promise you, Shailene, I shall never stop wishing for these things and more. I curse you and all that you touch, for you deserve nothing better and ever so much worse. With that, Janesh finally broke his stare that had frozen Shailene in place as he intoned his damning of her. She went to say something but found that no words came out of her opened mouth. She just let her jaw work without any vocalizations to match. Janesh didn't see this fish-out-of-water look, this flailing for words with which to respond. He had already turned and walked for the door. He opened it slowly and turned around, looking back at her over his right shoulder. He did not have a smile on his face, nor a frown. His face was one of nothing. He was empty. After a life lived with so much hope and such overflowing love, he had finally been emptied out and filled with naught but hate. But he had just spewed that hatred into the universe, sentencing Shailene to a hellish existence, and, with that emptying, Janesh looked like a vessel devoid of contents. He was a shamble man that was nothing but a husk. After their shared final glance, Janesh walked into the frozen night, no care for the very real danger of doing so. Be he lodestone or lodestar, he and his talent had cracked tonight, and that talent was leaking out of him, along with the heat of his body and tears long held back over many a night, helping others avoid this living death that would be his new existence. The door clapped shut, the noise dampened by the negative silence and snow. Shailene shrugged and began preparing for her company. Marcian, the bookkeeper's assistant, was slated to be there in roughly an hour for an evening full of adventure right there in her cottage. She started whistling as she put some stew above the fire to begin to rewarm in advance of Marcian's arrival.
Thank you for listening to Lodestar, an original short story by me, Jared I. McGee. All sounds you hear come from freesound.org and are being used under CC 01.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. Next up this week, let's join first-time guest author James Harrington to delve into the power of memory and reminiscence in Back to Before. Back to Before, an original short story by James Harrington. A wrinkled hand turned the knob on an old RCA radio, and it came to life with a pop. Warm sound came from the antique speakers, broken only by the occasional snap of static. As Bill Weatherford settled into a worn and scuffed rocking chair, a familiar guitar riff came onto the radio. It was a song he first heard as an 8-year-old boy in Oklahoma during the summer of 1959. I hear the train a-comin', it's rollin' round the bend, and I ain't seen the sunshine since I don't know when. I'm stuck in Folsom Prison and time keeps dragging on. But that train keeps a-rollin' on down to San Antone. On still summer nights, Bill used to be able to hear the train as it rolled south, shipping midnight freight from Tulsa to Dallas. The low whistle sound came in through the open window out of the still, stifling, hot, dusty air. He and his older brother Forrest used to stay up long after Ma and Pa had put them to bed, hoping to hear that low whistle in the distance. It was the only evidence they had that proved a world existed outside of their homestead, church, and Engel's General Store. When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son, always be a good boy. Don't ever play with guns. But I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. When I hear that whistle blowing, I hang my head and cry. Bill pulled a pack of cigarettes out of the front pocket of his worn blue button-up. He popped out a cigarette with a well-practiced motion, stuck the filter in his mouth, and flicked the wheel of an old Zippo lighter. A clean yellow flame lit the cigarette, and blue smoke curled out of Bill's slightly agape mouth. Marlboro Reds. Ma used to call them cowboy killers. Ma was a wholesome woman. Though life was hard for the family sometimes, Bill and Forrest never went to bed hungry. It was only years later that Bill had realized how often she herself must have gone to bed with an empty stomach. She sang in the choir at church and would bring out her mandolin after dinner. The family would sing songs from Ma's copy of Heavenly Highway hymns. Bill smiled, thinking back to those nights. He and Pa never had the voices Ma and Forrest did, but they sang nonetheless. I bet those rich folks eating from a fancy dining car. They're probably drinking coffee and smoking big cigars. Well, I know I had it coming, I know I can't be free. But those people keep a-moving, and that's what tortures me. Pa was a big man, strong as an ox and with a temperament to match. During planting season, he was up before dawn, taking care of the hogs and the family's one dairy cow. Once those chores were done, Pa would wake the boys up, still before the sun had gone up. He drove the old cat from dawn till dusk, and Bill and Forrest followed behind with a cloth sack full of seeds, throwing them into the furrows he opened up in the hard Oklahoma ground. If they didn't keep the pace, they knew what his father called a knockin' was coming. Pa didn't give his sons knockins for no reason. He wasn't unreasonably cruel, and he took no pleasure in it. But the bank didn't care that the Weatherfords only had 2 sons who lived to work an age. The bank expected their payments when they were due. No ifs, ands, or buts, as Ma used to say. So, the boys worked hard, and Pa worked harder. Once a year, when the harvest was done, Pa would take his sons to Ingalls and give them each a whole dime to spend on penny candy. He would use his own dime to buy a fine Dominican cigar. When they got home, they would sit on the porch, Pa smoking his cigar, and the boys eating their candy. Ma would join them, and the whole family sat out on the porch, laughing and smiling until long after the sun went down. Well, if they freed me from this prison, if that railroad train was mine, I bet I'd move it on a little farther down the line. Far from Folsom Prison. That's where I want to stay, and I'd let that lonesome whistle blow my blues away. Bill left home 3 weeks after his 18th birthday. Ma didn't come with him to the Greyhound station. She had when Forrest shipped off, but it was too hard for her this time. Bill knew that, and he didn't blame her. Forrest had shipped off to Fort Polk for basic training, and he was shipped back from Vietnam draped in old glory. The radio programs had called those early months of 1968 the Tet Offensive, and it cost Will his brother, his best friend. It was too hard for Ma to say goodbye again. Pa had walked with him the 2 miles to the bus station. Will carried a small satchel containing a few small personal effects. A family photo, a well-thumbed Bible, a small book of stamps, and his draft letter. They waited together until Will boarded the bus and started down the dusty road. Will wasn't sure, but he thought he saw the shimmer of tears in his pa's eyes. The song faded out on the radio, and Will Weatherford stubbed out the remnants of his Marlboro, lurching back into the present. They were all gone now. Ma, Pa, Forrest. Only he remained. He reached out and flipped off the RCA. He listened hard. He thought he could hear the train whistle in the distance as it rolled south. Thank you for listening to Back to Before, an original short story by James Harrington. James Harrington is a graduate of Boston College, a history teacher, and a die-hard Boston sports fan. He has trekked with the Fellowship, explored the universe aboard the USS Enterprise, traveled through the Inferno, and brought balance to the Force. Always with a smile on his face and a song in his heart. He is a lover of all things nerdy and spends far too much money on Star Wars comics and far too much time playing Skyrim. For hobbies, he plays the tin whistle and harmonica in Irish pubs from Boston to New York with the band Sláinte. and he reads just about anything he can get his hands on. We'll hope to hear more from Mr. Harrington quite soon here on the show. All sounds you hear behind Mr. Harrington's story come from freesound.org and are being used under CC 01.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. That does it for Prose this week. Again, please do share the podcast with a friend. And do keep your eyes peeled for a little Halloween special coming up quite soon. As always, I hope that you'll remember to love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is always, stranger than fiction. See you next time.